Hello, I'm Conall Keohane, and welcome to my TED Talk on cosmic horror. I wanted to start this TED Talk with a quote from H.P. Lovecraft, the original cosmic horror author. The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of a black sea of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little, but some day the piercing together of disassociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our own frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. This quote, I think, does a lot to give this kind of vibe of cosmic horror. And that leads me to my question: where did cosmic horror begin, and how has it changed from H.P. Lovecraft to the modern era? I am very much an enjoyer of fiction, and cosmic horror really gets to me because of its uniqueness. Its unique ideas and unique monsters that you don't really find in any other subjects of horror. But who actually wrote it? Cosmic horror was begun by Howard Phillips Lovecraft, who was born on Rhode Island and lived from 1890 to 1937. H.P. Lovecraft was originally inspired by Edgar Allan Poe, and a lot of his early work is very reminiscent of Poe's. He later went on to write stories like The Call of Cthulhu, At the Mountains of Madness, and The Color Out of Space, creating his own genre called cosmic horror. However, he's not the only author that I'm looking at. The second author I'm looking at is Jeff Vandermeer. Jeff Vandermeer is another American author of cosmic horror, famous for his Southern Reach trilogy. He was born in 1968 in Pennsylvania and is still alive and writing today. His trilogy, The Southern Reach, is a very different brand of cosmic horror than H.P. Lovecraft. It focuses a little more on environmentalism and those kind of ideas. The third and final author I compared was Thomas Ligotti. Ligotti is a lot more similar to Lovecraft in that he wrote short stories, and he was born 1953 and is still writing today. Ligotti, like I said, shares a lot of similarities with Lovecraft, and yet has his own differences. But what is cosmic horror? Cosmic horror is a fiction genre that is essentially horror using the ideas of the incomprehensible and the unknowable and forces beyond human control to elicit horror and dread in the reader. Cosmic horror's main focus is kind of the idea that there are places and things that humanity should not venture into, and the idea that we are not alone in the universe and that the other things that occupy this space with us are possibly far more powerful than we could ever imagine. Within cosmic horror, I found several changes from Lovecraft to Ligotti and Vandermeer. First off, I would like to talk about the monsters. The monsters of cosmic horror I have seen have changed in their meaning and acceptance from Lovecraft to Vandermeer and Ligotti. Another trend I saw with monsters is the humanization of monsters, a slow trend towards more human-looking or more human-adjacent monsters. And the third really big thing that I found that changed was the ideas of reality, this kind of veil over reality from Lovecraft's kind of idea that everything is as it is to Vandermeer and Ligotti, maybe not. So let's start with the monsters with the original author, Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft's monsters are the unknowable, unseeing, horrifying monsters. They are meant to represent the alien, the other, and the things that people were not meant to know. And they're not well liked. In his stories, they're meant to be monsters. They're not specifically said to be evil, but they're never working for humanity. Legati is very similar to Lovecraft. His monsters, however, are more like cosmic conspiracies, puppeteers that are shaping reality to their whims. A lot of his stories revolve around these creatures manipulating or controlling humans in strange ways. His monsters are also kind of based on the evil within, or the evil that comes from humanity, with several biblical references in his work, referring to his monsters often as demons or Satan. Vandermeer, however, is quite different from these past two authors. Vandermeer's monsters are not inherently evil. A lot of them used to be people or animals mutated in this place called Area X. And Vandermeer's monsters are meant to represent things. They kind of show what humanity must become in order to survive. A lot of his monsters are allegories for some environmentalism things, or the idea that our current path is not acceptable. Now there's something else I noticed about monsters. When you look at these original Lovecraft monsters, the Elder Thing and the Shoggoth, they're pretty monstrous, very much strange, alien, not like anything you've really seen on Earth before. However, as it got on, specifically with Legati, his monsters were a lot more human-looking. And even Vandermeer had a bit of this as well. And once again, going back to Lovecraft, like I said, his monsters are monstrous. They're meant to be alien. The reason he put them in is because they're meant to represent this otherness, therefore their looks are completely alien and are meant to be different. However, Legati is very different from this. For example, in one of his short stories, Christmas at Annalise's, the sort of villain of this story, Annalise, appears to be human throughout the story. However, right at the end, we get this image in our minds of this woman with this twisted smile that goes beyond normal. And this really is how Legati does his monsters. Most of them take human guises. A lot of them are almost considered to be human until the end, where they are referenced to be something else, usually sort of a space demon is described. Vandermeer does a bit of both. Several of the creatures encountered in Vandermeer's Southern Reach trilogy are these alien creatures, but all of them are reminiscent of things we find on Earth. They're meant to sort of represent some of the natural world. Vandermeer also uses doppelgangers in his series, a pretty well-known monster that takes the shape of other people. And they're kind of used to show this idea that monsters can be very similar to people. The idea of the alien being accepted when it's more like us. But what else changed? Besides the monsters that I found extremely interesting, was the idea of the veil over reality. This shows up a lot more in Legati's work than the other two authors, but I find it very interesting. It's the idea in the books that what we see and experience as the protagonists is not actually real, that there is a veil hiding what the truth is from us. Lovecraft didn't really use this. In a lot of Lovecraft stories, sometimes there are other dimensions or the dreamlands, for example, but for the most part, reality is as we see it. In Lovecraft's work, if there's a monster, it's really a monster. If you're looking at the ocean, it really is the ocean. All of his stuff is as it appears to the characters. However, Legati is almost a complete 180 of this. Legati's main point is that what we see is not real. The entire conspiracy against the human race is this idea that other beings are puppeteering our minds into believing a reality that doesn't exist. Legati's work is basically centered around this idea, and it is something that does not show up in Lovecraft, like I said, and is really interesting because it leads to a very different feeling in the work. And finally, there's Vandermeer. Jeff Vandermeer's work is kind of in a mid-range between Lovecraft and Legati's in this area. Vandermeer's stories take place in a location called Area X, this kind of warped place that's being subject to some sort of alien control. Every so often in his books, he kind of briefly mentions or puts in little things that maybe make you think that what is here is not as it seems, but it's never explicitly used. There's never really a point where it's revealed that all of this is something different. But it's very heavily implied that perhaps what the characters are experiencing is not quite what is really happening. So, quick recap of what I found from the change from Lovecraft to the two modern authors, Legati and Vandermeer. Lovecraft's original ideas are still seen throughout the works, but a lot has changed, specifically with the monsters. As I said earlier, the monsters have become different. They represent different things in other works, and some of them have even grown to be more human or more human adjacent. Another thing that I just covered, the idea that this reality is not what we think it is something that only shows up in the later works, showing a change between the original ideas and how they've been added on to by these new authors. Now, what does this change actually mean for the genre of cosmic horror? I think that cosmic horror is such a great genre for its uniqueness. And the fact that every author that contributes to it adds to that uniqueness. If everybody wrote like H.P. Lovecraft, it wouldn't be the same. But there are other benefits to this change. I think that cosmic horror, for those people who know about it, is often heavily dominated by H.P. Lovecraft. His works are the paramount, the big thing, what everybody knows. But there's a lot of problems with his work. Specifically, he had a lot of views that just don't stand up to modern day. He had racist views, sexist views that are really problematic in modern society. So I think it is really important that people can see that that has changed. The modern cosmic horror does not stay true to everything Lovecraft did. And they've really improved upon the series by moving it away from these problematic views. Legati still is very similar to Lovecraft in the way his stories are structured and the ideas within, but he's added his own ideas to it. He's added this idea that what we see is not what really is, and he's made these monsters that appear more human, and he's also gotten rid of the problematic views that plague Lovecraft's work. Vandermeer did something similar. Vandermeer is very different from Lovecraft. He wrote full-length books instead of short stories, and horror isn't really the focus of his stories. But he used cosmic horror in a way to write environmentalist fiction. The kind of through line of his stories is encouraging this action and kind of giving us the idea that our current path is not the one we should be on, and that we have to expand our ideas to save our world. And I think that that is so beautiful to see what was originally just fiction, originally just something somebody wanted to write, turned into a means for change, a way to get people to look at something else in a different way. So really, if I have a call to action, it's that I think that cosmic horror is such a great genre. It holds so many great things, but a lot of people don't know about it. A lot of people don't know about authors like Jeff Vandermeer or Thomas Ligotti. A lot of those authors can sometimes fall under the shadow of Lovecraft. And that's really a shame because they have so many great things to tell. So I really think that next time, if you ever want to read cosmic horror, try to find somebody you haven't read before. Try to find these new authors because their works are just as good and different and really deserve some attention. They need their spotlights. I'm going to end with one final Lovecraft quote that I just think is such a good ending. Who knows the end? What has risen may sink, and what has sunk may rise. Lonesomeness waits and dreams in the deep, and decay spreads over the tottering cities of men. Thank you.